Hi, my name is Lana from Djilyn Dreams. This video is made as additional instructions for artists who have chosen our D-free Art by Numbers kit. Anyone else is welcome to join as well to get some tips from us. The paint by numbers stage is quite straightforward. Just fill in the shapes with paint, following the instructions on the canvas or color diagram A. You might find the following tips useful though. In the areas with lighter colors, fade the lines and numbers on the canvas with white gesso provided in this set. Let it dry for at least 10 minutes. To achieve saturated colors, apply 2 to 4 layers with drying time of 5 to 10 minutes between them. Iridescent paints may look brighter with smooth finish. To achieve this, apply paint in thin layers with softer brush. Now, having our paint by numbers done, we are ready for the next challenge, art by numbers stage. The difference is that we show you the techniques and you decide whether you want to apply them or not and in which way you do that. And today's exercise's goal is to add some features to your artwork that will make it special and more personalized. For this stage we need our finished and dried canvas, paints and brushes, water and tissues. I will also use the D-free color diagram B from the kit, which provides recommendations on the color choice and area of application. One of the ways to add more texture and perspective to the mountains is to create a foggy effect at the bottom and to sharpen the top of the mountain's shapes. To achieve this, I choose two colors from the palette that are closest to the base color of the shape, but are correspondingly lighter and darker. I apply thicker layer at the edge of the shape while almost feathering it out closer to the center. For the mountains painted with dark red number 4, I choose orange number 5 to apply at the bottom. With a small soft pointed brush, I apply generous but not excessive amount of paint using gentle short vertical strokes. On the top, on the other hand, I use darker purple number 6 and use vertical strokes downwards from the edge of the shape. I do the same with the mountain shapes painted orange, purple and violet. The lighter colors are applied at the bottom and the darker ones to the top of the shape. This is an easy way to create volume and blend the colors in a way that connect the separate shapes of the landscape, creating a more cohesive look. Matte red gives beautiful transparent layer that can easily be sharpened at the top and faded down in the middle. For showing crevices, use a thicker layer. This design is a sibling design to our D2 Art by Numbers kit. And on purpose we have suggested absolutely different palette for the same shapes in order to show how different the landscape will look. They can work in tandem, like the same landscape in different time or on different planets. Now we are going to create a vignette effect around the bottom part of the painting. This allows to have a focus on the central area of the landscape. I used the darkest color on the palette, number 1, and a flat brush with firmer bristles. I use a piece of paper as palette, mainly to unload the excess paint from the brush. I avoid working the paint deep into the canvas. In the beginning I use almost dry brush, especially closer to the center of canvas. Towards the edges I can load the brush heavier. So, using very light and shallow touches, I gradually build up value from the center to the edges. I add some shadows on the stones and under the shrubs to give them some volume. Before starting with vignette on your canvas, it is worth practicing on some textured surface. This can be a piece of textured paper or even the side of your canvas where later it will be concealed with frame. I also apply a light touch of paint in the central part of the canvas to create the effect of uneven ground. As a final touch, we will add some contrasting details onto the shrubs. I will use the pointed brush and paint number 9 to apply lone strokes of various intensity and size, bigger in the foreground and smaller in the distance. You can decide whether you want to use it or not, but personally I like it how the highlights are contrasting with dark velvet and paint of the shrubs. Today we have learned how to modify the plain, uniform color of shapes in our artwork to give it some eye-catching details and a feeling of volume. Thank you very much for watching this video. We will appreciate your feedback in the comments. If you enjoyed it, please click on the like icon and visit our channel for more tutorial videos. Create and have fun!